April Fools, everybody! And now that we got the mic check out of the way, let's get this ball rolling. Hello and welcome to Atop the Brick Wall, where crap comics get buried. Say, it's Miller time. Time once again to delve into the mad ramblings of the king of comic controversy, or comic-versy himself, Frank Miller. This time, however, we're not going to be looking at any of his classic original works of style and innovation, nor the endless stream of fascist trash and bizarre writing styles he's now known for. No. Instead, we're going way back to the late 70s, early 80s, and the beginning of Frank Miller's career with his work on Marvel's Daredevil. Before he gained a reputation for helping to revolutionize the comics industry with works like The Dark Knight Rises and Sin City, and before he then ruined that reputation with works like All-Star Batman and Robin and Holy Terror, Frank Miller was just your standard starving comic book artist trying to eke out a living through whatever job he was handed. He started out doing uncredited work for the Gold Key imprint of The Twilight Zone and the DC anthology series Weird War Tales, both of which have been featured on a certain Longbox horror segment a few years back that are in desperate need of views, hint hint, before he settled into a job at Marvel as a fill-in and cover artist for various titles. And it was during one particular drawing job on the spectacular Spider-Man that he was introduced to everyone's favorite radar-powered hero, Daredevil. While we know him today for his incredible Netflix series and less than stellar film career, at the time, Daredevil was one of the lesser characters in Marvel's stable of characters, with the series teetering on cancellation due to poor sales. It wasn't helped by an ever-rotating line of writers for the series who had no idea what direction to take the character in. Gary Conway, whom you may know as the co-creator of The Punisher and the guy who scripted Gwen Stacy's death, thought it should take more of a sci-fi direction, featuring robots from thousands of years in the future, and villains decked out in enough sci-fi gear to make Dr. Doom look normal. While Roger McKenzie, well known for his previous work in horror comics, depicted Daredevil in much darker, surreal settings, including fighting a personification of death itself. With how often the tone and setting changed during this period, I wouldn't have been surprised if they decided to change his profession to a janitor, made the series an advertisement for cleaning products, and started calling him Dirt Devil. Actually, that is something to point out. While Miller's often attributed as the one responsible for the darkening of Daredevil, Mackenzie's actually the writer that started this metamorphosis, making Daredevil a much darker character than the more goofy tales of the other writers. He became a guy not afraid to exploit the criminal underground of Hell's Kitchen, roughing up small-time crooks for information, and was given a revised origin story where he stalked the Fixer, remember the mob boss responsible for his father's death, eventually literally scaring him to death. The Fixer would later get revenge, though, as 30 years later, he came back to kill Frank Miller's career. He was also the creator of Ben Urich, a Daily Bugle reporter who eventually deduces Daredevil's identity and becomes a major support for Daredevil, and the writer who killed off the recurring villain Deathstalker. And I mean perma-killed, since the original character has yet to be resurrected to this day. Well, that is what you get for naming yourself Deathstalker. Death doesn't exactly counter with restraining orders. Halfway through Mackenzie's run, Frank was assigned to the book as a penciler, his art first appearing in Daredevil 158. Frank, as well as most of the Marvel editorial staff, didn't like Mackenzie's writing, leading to Miller nearly quitting and the book almost cancelled for good. But, after Miller wrote a short script and ran it by then-editor Denny O'Neil, O'Neil was so impressed with it that he took Mackenzie off the project and gave the reins to Miller, starting with issue 168. At first doing both writing and artwork, before Claus Janson took over art duties when the new workload became too much for one guy to handle. Miller would continue the series' darker tone that Mackenzie started, but made it more realistic and gritty than most other comics of the time, basically rewriting and retconning Daredevil's entire history and turning Daredevil into an amoral anti-hero. Retcons! When you can't be bothered to fix mistakes. Side effects may include unneeded darkening, excessive violence, women in refrigerators, and a short-term spike in your readership followed by your sales flatlining. Miller went all out for his version of Daredevil. Practically his entire universe and backstory was rewritten for this incarnation, with his rogues gallery being wiped out or all but forgotten, his father rewritten as a drunk who physically beat a young Matt Murdock, giving him new reasons for wanting to become a lawyer, and making the Kingpin, whom you may know from Spider-Man, the main bad guy of Daredevil. His fighting and recurring villains were also revised based on Miller's love for ninjas, changing to a more realistic martial arts-based style to match his new backstory. In Miller's version, Sensei Stick, yes, Sensei Stick, discovered the recently blinded Matt Murdock and trained him in the style of his ninja enclave, the Chaste, sort of like Batman Begins, but with fewer hallucinogens. This is also where he introduced the rival clan simply known as The Hand, and the brutal mercenary and Daredevil's on-again, off-again girlfriend, Elektra, who most of you probably unfortunately only know from the terrible 2005 movie played by Jennifer Gardner. And 10 years later, a certain creative team would take inspiration from Miller's reworking of Daredevil to create their own martial arts-based team of mutated animals that would take the world by storm. Geriatric Gangrene Jiu-Jitsu Gerbils! While a move to the dark and edgy is unfortunately commonplace nowadays, and what I'd like to put most of the blame on for people not reading comics anymore, making Daredevil the grittiest superhero of Marvel's lineup was seen as revolutionary for the time, and finally established an identity for the former B-list superhero. The new image arrived just in time for the Bronze Age of comics, where comics were breaking away from the comic code to tell more realistic and edgy stories about drugs and gang violence and other real-world things that comics hadn't really delved into previously. So the tone of both the book and comics in general were already there, but Miller is often credited as the one who perfected it. He is the guy responsible for pushing Daredevil into the top tier of Marvel superheroes, and for saving the title from cancellation, with sales skyrocketing to the point it graduated from bi-monthly to a monthly title with only 3 issues of his run. Yet for all the credit he's given, Miller's stint on the book surprisingly only lasted 2 years, his last regular issue being 191. He'd returned to write the occasional issue, including the acclaimed Daredevil Born Again storyline, but the job that began his rise as an industry great was complete, and he'd move on to such acclaimed projects as the first Wolverine series, his first original miniseries Ronin, and eventually The Dark Knight Returns, his magnum opus and the book that would change the face of the comics industry forever. And, as we all know, there were absolutely no repercussions resulting from this tonal shift in comics, and Frank Miller has churned out nothing but high-quality material since then. While I was tempted to start at the beginning with Frank Miller's take on Daredevil, I think I want to save that for a future Secret Origins month, since it is basically a retelling of Daredevil's origins. Instead, we're going to be looking at a certain storyline written around the middle of his run, which features Daredevil's encounter with another particular anti-hero that Miller helped popularize, the Punisher. I've talked about the Punisher on a number of previous occasions, so I won't go into that much detail here. However, keep in mind that the Punisher started out as a supporting character, much like Daredevil, mostly working both with and against Marvel heroes as a more extreme and homicidal vigilante than most heroes of the time. His personality has always remained very focused and unrelenting, with a very black and white view of good and evil. In Marvel Comics, he's always been a bit of an anomaly, a character that doesn't quite follow the code that most other heroes follow, especially for the time he was introduced. He's not a guy that other heroes like to team up with, nor a guy who likes to team up with other heroes, preferring to shoot bad guys based on his moral ethics, rather than the more liberal attitudes of most other characters. His stint as a member of the Thunderbolts notwithstanding. So how does it team up with another anti-hero who shares similar moral standards and attitudes toward crime fighting go? Well, let's dig into Daredevil, number 182 through 184, and find out.
Welcome to Atop the Brick Wall. Crap comics you buried. Brickara's gonna show you books where quality will vary. Stop writing ads around low. Mark Millar, you're kinda psycho. Anyone who's ever written something awful, it's about to get hairy. Brickara. Minifig, kick, where's your silence vest? Brickara. host a review show. Come and be his guest, Brickara. Zombies, doctors, babies, and a duck, Brickara. This comics junk, Brickara.
Reading from the Child's Play trade, so no look at the covers. However, the cover for the first issue does feature something that I need to explain. While the trade does contain 3 issues, it only has half of the first issue featured, 182. For some reason, possibly for relevancy, they completely cut out Daredevil's story for the trade. What did Daredevil's story entail? Well, remember that Elektra character that I mentioned earlier? Frank Miller's original creation and one of the most endearing elements of his run on Daredevil? Yeah, she's dead. Killed by Bullseye in the previous issue. Because even in his heyday, not even Frank Miller was above women in refrigerators. As I mentioned, Daredevil and Elektra, despite fighting nearly every time they met, had a thing going on, so her death left him pretty shook up. Especially since she died in his arms. In this issue, Daredevil isn't convinced that she's dead, since, being blind, he thinks he could have mistaken her death. So he runs around town trying to gain information as both Matt Murdock and Daredevil about if she truly is dead, even going up against the Kingpin, since she last worked for him as an assassin. Eventually, he goes to the graveyard and digs up her grave, convinced that it's someone completely different and she's simply hiding somewhere. Until he exhumes her corpse and proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that she's dead. In between these scenes, we get the Punisher's story that leads into issue 183. And while I hate to skim over an entire story like this, especially one as infamous and well-written as Elektra's death and Daredevil's grief, it doesn't really fit in with the theme of this story arc, so like the trade, I'm just gonna skip over it. You know, I've joked about how useless this numbering is in the past, but since we're getting a heavily truncated version of it in this trade, maybe they should have called it issue 182.5 here. We open on the Punisher, currently incarcerated at Rikers Island Penitentiary, where he was also imprisoned in the previously featured The Punisher number 60. Punisher is toweling off when he's approached by 3 other prisoners. Recognize us, tall man? Ichabod Crane, Big Jim Slade, and Luigi? Actually, they're members of a gang run by Injun Joe, who the Punisher put in the infirmary before the events of this book. They're clearly not happy about their leader close to death, and they rush Frank with homemade knives and a steel pipe. Of course, the Punisher has faced supervillains before, so 3 random thugs is nothing for him, and he fights back. And on this panel, the sound effect they use is FAP, while his fist appears to be dangerously close to the guy's crotch. Dude, that's Big Jim Slade. If you think you can jerk him off to death, you don't know his raw sexual power.
Big Jim, former tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs, is outfitted with various whips, chains, and a sexual appetite that will knock your socks off.
Actually, Frank wraps his towel around the guy's neck, which he then uses to snap it. Jocko, the only named convict, has his wrist grabbed by the Punisher and is thrown on top of the other guy's knife. The last remaining gang member pulls his knife out of his friend and prepares to slice Frank. But Frank simply smiles, and in the next panel, it's confirmed that he did indeed kill all 3. 3 men dead in the 4th incident this week. You've killed a lot of criminals in your time, Punisher. That makes you extremely unpopular with the other convicts. Which is why he's not in solitary and is allowed to kill and mutilate the other prisoners without consequence. While Frank performs chin-ups in his cell, this agent guy tells him that a massive shipment of narcotics is about to be unloaded somewhere on Long Island. Because of certain pressures on his agency, he's not legally allowed to take action against the shipment. But that doesn't mean he can't have Frank suddenly escape from his cell and just happen to be there as they're unloading the crates. Later that night, we see Turk Barrett and Grotto, 2 minor recurring Daredevil characters, escaping from their cell using suction cups. Because of course the walls of a prison would be smooth enough for enough suction to hold a grown man. However, they're suddenly distracted by a large explosion off-panel, followed by an alarm going off to signal the Punisher escaping from jail. And somehow they're unable to hear a freaking helicopter right over their heads as it drops a ladder right behind them for the Punisher to climb. Turk notices the ladder just in time to grab onto it, and he starts climbing it, trying to negotiate with Frank about helping him out. To which Frankly simply cuts the rope, leaving Turk to fall in the river.
Just you wait until I tell the Thunderbolts about this! What do you mean it's not the same Thunderbolts?
We cut to Frank sitting on a branch, watching the convoy of trucks carrying the illegal narcotics, as he silently thinks about the kind of people he's dealing with.
Those men are filth, peddling their poison to the weak, the lost, the innocent. Their kind have much to pay for. Much. And they can start by giving me that $10 they owe for that Starbucks order that one time!
The Punisher springs into action, taking out the guy on a motorcycle with a wire before firing tear gas in the truck and shooting down the escaping gang. The last gang member drops his gun, telling Frank that he gives up. And Frank shoots him in cold blood, telling him that he doesn't take prisoners. And on the next page, we can see that the guy he shot was a young kid. Yeah, just as a heads up, there's gonna be quite a bit of child death and abuse in these particular comics. It's not as violent or exploitive as a lot of other comics I've seen, but I understand if you feel uncomfortable about seeing children put into these kinds of situations. Anyway, the agent shows back up and tells Frank well done. However, he says he's too great a risk to just leave outside of prison, so he pulls a gun on Frank to arrest him again. Of course, the Punisher just took down a heavily armed convoy of people, so he just knocks him out with a kick to the face. And so, issue 182, or what they gave us anyway, ends with an extreme close-up of the Punisher's eyes.
I couldn't let them take me back to prison. Not now. The enemy enlists children. The war has gotten dirtier. I'm needed more than ever. I need to kill even more children in the crossfire!
Wow, even I feel dirty for that joke. Issue 183 opens at Our Lady of Hope Parochial School, where student Mary Elizabeth O'Corin isn't quite herself.
The snakes attacked Mary during 5th period civics. They squirmed under the door and plopped from the cracks in the ceiling and oozed, hissing and spitting, between the floorboards of Our Lady of Hope Parochial School.
The terrifying tale of Indiana Jones' school days. Mary Liz is on a drug crash and is suddenly seeing and feeling writhing snakes, which crawl all over her and down her throat, causing her to stand up and scream, and interrupting a lesson on the Constitution by a nun and a visiting Matt Murdock. She starts to froth at the mouth and thrash all around the room, trying to shake the invisible reptiles. She slams into another student, then turns around and leaps, throwing herself at the window and I know it's heartless for me to laugh at this, and I just said how child death and disgusting, but just look at this image! First of all, what angle do you have to launch yourself from to perfectly sail through the middle of the window frame? We see in the previous panel that she's either jumping from the floor or a desk, both of which I'm pretty sure aren't high or stable enough to cause a leap to that height. It looks like she's aiming more for the wall area between the windows based on this trajectory. Second, how did she manage to put enough power behind her leap to literally shatter 2 windows and the frame? Again, in the previous panel, her body is twisting as she's leaping, which suggests that she's not jumping with that much power. Unless they were made of balsa wood and sugar glass, I don't think you could break through even if there was a wall right in front of the window to leap off of. Or did Matt Murdock himself throw her through the window based on this unfortunately placed line? Third, she's flying through the window face first. Even if she did find something to launch herself from that would give her enough power to sail through a window like this, I'm pretty sure she'd end up doing more damage to herself than the window. Speaking of, fourth, there's not a scratch on her from this. No cuts, no blood, no torn clothes, nothing broken, no injuries from slamming face first into a double window. I mean, sure, she sustains injuries from falling several stories to the ground below, but flying through glass shards and thick wood? That's just something you can walk off. Fifth, her pose. Not only is it inconsistent with her pose from the last panel, especially since she should have her arms in front of her face, but how do you intentionally make a pose like that? She looks like Peter Pan having the drug high of his life. Sixth, how was this window designed anyway? From the previous panel, it looks like one of those sliding windows where you can open the bottom to get some air in, but this panel makes it look like all one pane. Seventh, apparently her sleeves ejected at the last minute, since she's clearly wearing a long-sleeved shirt in the panels before, but here, she's wearing short sleeves. Eighth, and finally, nobody stopped her? She was flopping around like a fish on a springboard. Everyone in the class clearly noticed her screaming and flailing, and yet nobody, not the students, the teacher, or especially Daredevil, tried to restrain her? I don't understand if she screamed and immediately flew out the window, but she clearly had enough time to smash into several students before finding a launching platform that would send her sailing through the glass and wood like it was paper. Or was the amendment about the voting age being lowered to 18 really engaging enough not to stop a classmate from killing themselves? Matt quickly ducks into a storage room to change into Daredevil, then runs outside where a crowd is already gathered around Mary Liz. They've called an ambulance, but Daredevil tells them it will arrive too late to be of any use, so he grabs her and starts running for the hospital. Sometimes I'm happy for the accident that blinded me and amplified my remaining senses. Sometimes I'm grateful for the world of sound and smell it opened up for me, a world that no other man can share. So, in retrospect, I should have been able to hear the accelerated heartbeat and respiration of a panicking young girl and could have done something before she threw herself out of a window. Oops. Daredevil manages to get her to the hospital, but it's too late to do anything and she dies in surgery. If we'd had another few minutes, if not for the drugs, we might have saved! Drugs? Angel dust. Angel dust. You're sure? Well, we were thinking it might have been China Cat, based on this Roy Harper character the other week, but then we realized that only an idiot would assume it would cause hallucinations. We're still considering Porcelain Bunny, though. The doctor tells Daredevil, who is trying to I Am a Man punch the wall, that this isn't the first case they've had recently, recounting how the previous week, a boy had a bad trip on the drug and plucked his own eyes out under the influence. Can you imagine how tragic it must be to live the rest of your life totally blind? Yes. How do people not realize Daredevil's blind, based on his mask design? I mean, if he was wearing a full mask like Spider-Man, you could assume that he could still see out of the eyepieces, or if he included glasses or something over his eyes. But a mask that covers the eyes but leaves the nose and mouth area completely visible? You might as well just wear a blindfold for how hard you're trying to hide that certain feature. The doctor then starts to go into a lecture about the drug, how easy it is to manufacture, how many names it goes under, PCP, angel dust, crystal, etc., how it was originally developed as an animal tranquilizer, and how greatly it affects the human brain if even used once, collecting in the brain and triggering symptoms days, weeks, or even years in the future. It's a nasty drug, probably one of the worst out there, and its side effects are often deadly. Anyway, the doctor's recitation of the drug's Wikipedia page comes to a sudden halt when the brother of Mary Liz, Billy, comes rushing in, restrained by two orderlies. He demands to see his sister, but Daredevil tells him that she's dead. No! It ain't fair! It just ain't fair! How can Mary be dead when the two bums who killed her are still alive and pushing their crap out on the streets? Too easy. Billy exclaims that he's going to kill the dealers and rushes out of the hospital. Billy, wait! I know how you feel, but you can't take the law into your own hands. I mean, who do you think you are? A costumed vigilante? Daredevil decides to search for the dealers, whom Billy referred to as Hogman and his slimy partner, and does the Dark Knight Returns pose as he searches the slums. Darkness doesn't descend on Hell's Kitchen. It spews up from shadowed doorways and back alleys and fire-gutted tenements, as if bloated and blackened from a day's worth of pain and misery and suffering. Or perhaps if hungry for more. Though in actuality, it's just searching for a lozenge. All that black and grime really clogs up the throat after a while. Daredevil doesn't find anything jumping from rooftop to rooftop, so he takes his search to ground level, putting on a jacket and hat. I'd question how effective this disguise is if he's still wearing his mask, but if it works for the Ninja Turtles, I guess everyone in comics is just completely blind. Meanwhile, Billy returns home to his quarreling parents, taking advantage of their distraction to sneak into his parents' bedroom and take his father's gun. And in light of all the recent incidents lately, I'm just gonna skip to the next page where this kid, named Joey, and his friends are knocking on somebody's door, asking for Hogman. The guy who answers isn't Hogman, but says he's working for him, and sells the kid some angel dust, pocketing some of the money for himself. So what if I skim a little profit off the top for myself? Times are tough all over. And since I'm stealing someone else's earnings instead of making my own, I guess you could say I'm making a false profit? This comic's really dreary. I need to make a corny joke every once in a while. Joey and his friends smoke the drug, then head out onto the streets with the intention to kill someone. They happen across Daredevil, still unconvincingly dressed in that getup, and they try to stab and beat him to death. He manages to avoid their attacks, hoping he doesn't have to hurt them, right before he's stunned by a right hook. The kid in the purple shirt gets ready to finish him off, and he's stabbed by a knife thrown at his back. Bryan Adams lied to me! It doesn't feel so right! The kid falls dead in front of Daredevil, and the Punisher enters the scene, being the one who threw the knife. Daredevil quickly detects him. It's a man. He's big. His heartbeat is strong. His movement's confident, fluid. He's in excellent shape. And he's a killer. A killer chef, that is. You haven't tasted anything until you've tried his ribeyes and potatoes. The Punisher runs at the other kids and starts beating the crap out of them.
Look at me, punks! Remember my face! It's the last thing you're ever going to see, and I want you to carry the memory of it straight to hell!
But how are we supposed to remember your face if he keeps punching us in the face?
Oh, I never thought of that. Okay, 5-second break. Got a good enough glance?
Yeah.
Good.
Punisher knocks them out and prepares to kill them, but Daredevil, not as into child murder as he is, throws a trash can at Punisher to distract him.
Ugh, what? Who? Daredevil? I've read about you, Daredevil. It's a pleasure to meet you. Oh my gosh, Daredevil! I'm such a huge fan! Would you mind if we got a selfie together?
Yeah, sure, dude.
Great! Just stand right over here, look at the camera, and say bullets! Camera's this way, Dee Dee.
Huh?
Oh.
Yeah, I do that. As the Punisher starts to introduce himself to Daredevil, Flapper, the sleazy drug dealer from earlier, tries to get away from them, but is then shot through the chest by a figure on the rooftops. While Punisher just looks the body over, a little upset that someone beat him to it, Daredevil heads up to the roof of a building to find Billy holding a smoking gun. He quietly whispers that he wanted to kill Flapper, but he just couldn't do it, intentionally misfiring. Later, we see that Billy has been taken to court, with the prosecutor demanding that the judge charge him as an adult for premeditated murder. Luckily, Matt Murdock appears, volunteering to represent Billy.
You're making a mistake, Murdock. This boy's guilty. It's an open and shut case.
No. It really isn't. As Daredevil states a little while later, Flapper was shot by a high-powered rifle, not an old handgun like the kid was holding. An analysis of the bullet wound and how it entered and left the body should be proof in and of itself that Billy didn't kill him. Rifle ammunition and handgun bullets aren't the same thing, and their size and speeds would leave different markings. A professional look at the body would confirm this. And that's not considering other factors, where he was standing, how much light was in the area, the angle of the shot, the limited range of the gun he was holding. Any one of these would probably exonerate Billy as the killer. Which brings me to my next question of how did Billy end up in court to begin with? The streets were empty, save for Billy, Daredevil, the Punisher, Flapper, and the gang. What cops were so nearby that they saw Billy and managed to arrest him? Who spotted the shot, managed to notice the shooter, ID'd him as Billy, called the cops, and had him arrested? Personally, I'd be more willing to believe either the psychotic gun-wielding vigilante or the doped-up half-dead gang had more to this. Why wasn't Daredevil there to tell them that they have the wrong idea? Or did Daredevil himself turn Billy in? Why? Again, he knows Billy is innocent. Billy himself admitted that he intentionally missed Flapper. Daredevil knows Flapper wasn't shot by a handgun. Was it to protect him from crime lords out looking for the shooter? I think a trial would draw more attention to a kid accused of killing a drug dealer. So congratulations, Daredevil, you just got that kid killed. If not by the court, then by Flapper's boss, who's not happy one of his pushers got taken out and might want to kill the guy Fingers as the one responsible. I'd play the Batman Forever, it just raises too many questions clip, but I don't need to. There's no question about it. This is really, really stupid, yet a good chunk of the comic is now devoted to this sidetrack. Jeez, even when I'm trying to give Miller credit, he comes up with something this frustratingly ludicrous. Anyway, the judge sets a date for Billy's trial and everyone adjourns. Billy released into custody of his school's coach, Coach Donahue. Matt tells Billy not to worry and that the law will find him innocent if he gives it a chance. Of course, if the law worked, he wouldn't be here in the first place, and he'll probably be found guilty because someone found an arrowhead next to the body with how ludicrous this accusation is. We cut to a short while later in the office of the Daily Bugle, where Daredevil is talking to Ben Ulrich, the reporter I mentioned earlier who deduced Daredevil's true identity.
Smoking again, Ben? Thought you quit.
Surgeon General's report is the last thing that I need right now, Hornhead. Especially if you're gonna fill the pages with your purple prose again and force Brickara back into his parents' basement. He asks Ben for information about the Punisher, which Ben pulls out of a nearby filing cabinet. Haven't got much on him. He's a vigilante, like you.
Not like me. He kills. Not like me. I just throw people who murder my girlfriend off 7-story rooftops with intent to murder, then, failing that, try to scare them to death with a game of Russian roulette. I'm as gentle as a kitten and a ball of yarn.
Also, Daredevil does eventually murder Bullseye in the main Marvel universe, so yeah. Despite protests from Ben about how dangerous the Punisher is, Daredevil decides to go up against him, deeming him too dangerous to be free. We then cut to Daredevil stalking out the scene of the crime, going over what we already know. That Billy wasn't the one who killed Flapper, and whoever did do it had to have had a high-powered rifle with telescopic view. However, he says he can't find enough proof to back this up. Until he finds a spent shell casing in between two chimneys.
Of course! The killer was Bert from Mary Poppins!
As Daredevil wonders why the shooter wouldn't have taken an easier shot from a ledge behind Billy's location, thinking that maybe the shooter can't climb that high, he suddenly hears a thack sound and people yelling. It turns out to be the Punisher, beating up a junkie for information about Hogman. The junkie insists that he doesn't know anything, and Punisher continues to beat on him.
Spill it, junkie, or so help me all!
And he gets a face full of Daredevil's Billy Club, followed by Daredevil himself kicking him across the face. You know, being a junkie, you'd think I would have seen it all. Daredevil and Punisher fight for a bit, Daredevil saying he doesn't agree with the Punisher's methods, and vice versa. However, Punisher says that they don't need to fight, that they could be allies, terrorizing the underworld and eliminating the enemy that they share.
Join me, and together we can rule the galaxy as father and son.
But Daredevil again states that since the Punisher kills his enemies, that makes them enemies. But before he can land another punch, Frank pummels him with an uppercut, then shoots him with a tranquilizer dart. Punisher then resumes beating on the old man, eventually stopping his heart. And apparently that's all he wanted to do, since he just runs off, allowing Daredevil to attempt to resuscitate him.
Yeah, I could kill you or take you somewhere else to demand information, but hey, The Walking Dead is on.
Daredevil finally succeeds in restarting the junkie's heart, allowing him to whisper where Hogman is. We cut to Papa's Olympian Palace, where Hogman and two of his goons are eating and talking about Flapper's recent death. until Daredevil sneaks in behind them.
Better lay off the carbohydrates, Hogman, 'cause I'm about to go Atkins diet on your ass!
Daredevil tells him that he deduced that Hogman found out that Flapper was stealing most of the profits from their drug racket and was about to cut him out entirely. So Hogman, being a heavy person unable to climb that far up buildings, was the one who took the shot between the chimneys. Hogman says Daredevil can't pin it on him and orders his henchmen to take him on, but he mistakenly hired the only smart nameless thugs in the history of comics, since they just ignore Daredevil and continue eating, allowing him to take Hogman into custody.
You can just forget about Christmas bonus! And don't eat my sandwich, Ray!
We cut to 2 weeks later, where Billy's trial has commenced. On the witness stand is the junkie from earlier, still bandaged from the pummeling that the Punisher gave him, who says that Billy indeed missed his shot, and it was someone with a rifle who shot Flapper, leading to the case being dismissed. So a study of the bullet wound and the gun fired wouldn't hold up in court, but the testimony of an old junkie who couldn't see that well in the dark and who recently suffered a concussion completely exonerates the kid of any wrongdoing? When you're making Unikitty Court the more credible judicial system,
What is up, my litigators? It's time to get judicious!
stop writing immediately! So yeah, what we all know from the first panel is confirmed by the most unreliable of witnesses. And what was the significance of this entire subplot? So with Billy's name cleared, Hogman, real name Peter Grunter, but I'm still calling him Hogman since either name is absolutely ridiculous, is brought in to stand trial. However, when he insists that he didn't kill his partner, Matt detects no variation in his heartbeat.
Hogman's telling the truth. He didn't kill his partner.
Or he just knows how to act innocent by thinking calm thoughts and controlling his breathing. Normal or accelerated heartbeat doesn't confirm if someone's lying or not. As a lawyer with heightened senses, you should know this. But nope, Matt's instantly convinced that Hogman's telling the truth and agrees to represent him in his trial, angering and exercising Punisher, who's listening to plot convenience news on his TV. Being who he is, he grabs his rifle and gets ready to hunt down Hogman.
Fire up the griddle, boys, 'cause I'm frying bacon tonight!
Later, we see Matt and his then-girlfriend Heather Glenn sitting in the park discussing a business subplot I skipped over in the last issue. Matt says that her position on the board of directors of the company she inherited from her father isn't actually helping her in a business sense, and urges her to resign. As she protests, thinking Matt's just telling her she can't do anything, Matt finally shows his true feelings for her, and tells her that there's something even better she can become. And so the issue ends with Matt proposing to Heather in the middle of Central Park. Ah, what a cute couple. I'm sure their relationship will be a long and happy one. Oh, right. Daredevil. Issue 184 begins with a close-up of Hogman's mouth eating spaghetti.
Course I'm smiling. I'm always smiling. You wanna know why I'm smiling, Smitty?
Because you're auditioning for an Orbit Gum commercial? Actually, he's bragging to his friend in a restaurant about how he's being represented by Matt Murdock, and he's sure that'll clear his name of the murder charge no problem. And he's completely unaware of the Punisher taking aim at him with a rifle from the next building over. Will you gentlemen be having dessert?
Dessert? Listen, sweetheart, I need more calories in my diet like I need a hole in the head.
Actually, Punisher is stopped from letting the hot air out of Hogman's head by Daredevil sneaking up behind him and tackling him to the ground in a 2-page spread. I actually really love the juxtaposition of this shot and how the motion images get redder as Daredevil gets closer to the Punisher. If you're gonna do a pointless 2-page spread, this is how to do it. Also, don't make me have to flip it on its side, that's a good move too.
Good guys wear red. Except on Casual Fridays, where they're also allowed to wear shades of purple.
Daredevil says that Hogman is under his protection, but Punisher's code of ethics doesn't allow for any exceptions. He shoots a chimney that Daredevil landed under, burying him in rubble, before making his exit. Daredevil quickly unearths himself and regrets not being able to capture Punisher, but takes comfort in the fact that he botched Hogman's assassination. Okay, so Hogman isn't the classiest client I've ever defended in court. But his heartbeat didn't jump when he told me he was innocent, which means he told the truth. I hope. You're seriously playing all your cards that he's innocent solely on the fact that his heart didn't skip a beat? You are dumb! It's revealed later why Hogman's heart rate didn't spike, but this is a facepalm that I need to address now. Yes, heart rate discrepancies can technically be used to help determine if someone is lying or not. One of the functions of a polygraph, or lie detector, is to measure the heartbeat of the interviewee to detect for changes in rhythm, as lying triggers nervousness that can result in slightly accelerated heartbeat. However, that's not the only factor in lying, and not the only thing most polygraphs check. Changes in respiration, cold sweat, skin sensitivity, lack of eye contact, twitches in facial muscles, stuttering, inability to remember forged details, all are also factors that can determine if a subject is lying, and most of which are also measured by polygraphs and checked by interviewers. But even with everything they check, polygraphs can still be fooled, to the point where they're often not considered as reliable evidence. It depends on a number of factors. How long the subject had to practice and rehearse for the interview, how masterful they are at slowing their breathing and respiration, what their relation with the interviewer is, what the attitude of the interviewer is, how the room is laid out, what they had to eat, if they take drugs or use other medical equipment, how much stress they're put under. All these factors can throw off a polygraph test, leading to an obviously guilty person passing with flying colors, such as serial killer Gary Ridgway, and even perfectly innocent people flunking across the board. So the fact that you're convinced that this guy is innocent solely based on his heart rate at the time is not only stupid, it is idiostuporific. Cubed. George Takei, can you add anything to this?
You are made of stupid.
We then cut to a brief scene of Heather Glenn, where it's revealed she turned Matt down, thinking he was telling her she wasn't capable of running a company. And seeing as how she's signing orders for shady accounts while a shady businessman looks over her shoulder, he's not exactly wrong. We then cut over to court, where Matt is testifying that his client is innocent. Weeks ago, young Billy O'Corin was charged with slaying John Flapper Phillips, and acquitted. At the same time, the prosecution was desperate to find a scapegoat for this highly publicized crime. They are still desperate, and once again, an innocent stands accused. My client is not a killer. He's not a killer! Except for all those kids we saw him and Flapper give drugs to, who either killed themselves under the influence or were killed by others. But other than that, he's as innocent as a newborn baby. If that baby was born with red skin, horns, and a trade collection of Marville. Matt tells the court that within 24 hours, he'll have found evidence that exonerates Hogman as the killer and fingers the actual perpetrator as not only the killer, but a drug dealer that administers narcotics to children. Much to the horror of Coach Donahue, who, with Billy, are present for some reason. Coach Donahue, what's wrong? Nothing, Billy. Nothing at all. Just filling up my pants, Billy. Nothing to worry about. Hours later, at the office of Matt and his law partner Foggy Nelson, Foggy and their secretary Becky Blake are heading out to a barbecue, while Matt hangs around waiting for a phone call. He was actually bluffing in court that he had evidence to pin the murder on someone else, in the hope that the person actually behind it would contact him, allowing him to either meet with the guy or trace him back to where he can be apprehended. A call eventually comes, and Matt almost gives away his secret identity in front of Foggy and Becky when he picks up the phone before it rings.
Hello? Heather? Heather? Of course! The only reason you couldn't marry me is because you were the murderer and drug trafficker all along!
You see, this is why you can never hold down a relationship. Actually, Heather was just calling to check on him. She admits that she does still have feelings for him, and she's still willing to consider marriage, but she also has to think things over first. Matt tells her that he's still madly in love with her, and then puts her on hold as a call from Coach Donahue comes in.
Those
Matt tells Coach Donahue that he knows he's been dealing in narcotics and suspects him of murdering Flapper. Donahue tells him to meet at the gymnasium in an hour, so an hour later, Matt strolls through the doors of the school. He doesn't find anyone there, so he just starts loudly telling Donahue that he knew that he was Hogman's connection at the grade school, and, like Hogman, he was dissatisfied with his cut. He orders Donahue to tell him if he actually did murder Flapper so he could pin it on Hogman and become solely in charge of the operation, when a strange growling sound fills the room.
That sound. Some sort of animal. No, not an animal. That's just my stomach. That barbecue Foggy mentioned actually sounds good right about now.
Actually, it's the coach, clearly doped up with the same foam leaving his mouth as Mary Liz had earlier. He leaps at Matt, who just barely dodges, Donahue slamming into a locker. He quickly recovers and hurtles himself at Matt again. Matt first thinks that Donahue is dipping into his own stash, before coming to the conclusion that somebody else drugged him to keep him from talking. He finally manages to subdue the coach, knocking him out with a full Nelson, before going off to call an ambulance.
I don't like this. Not at all. Who juiced up that coach? And why? Who juiced Coach Donahue? New mystery series coming to ABC this fall. Check your local listings for day and times.
We then get a scene where the junkie from last issue, Marky, is pleading with Hogman for some heroin. Hogman isn't happy that Marky ratted him out, but tells him that he'll give him his fix if he tells the judge he was stoned at the time. Something that really should have been brought up in the first place, but I guess that ship has sailed. Marky agrees, and then Hogman just kills him by giving him a pure dose. Remember, Matt, your client may be many things, but he's not a killer. Later in court, with Marky gone and no other evidence to support the charge, the judge acquits Hogman and closes the case. Billy asks Matt who did kill Flapper, to which Matt responds he's not sure. And then Hogman approaches Matt.
I'm off the hook now, right, Murdoch? Yes, Hogman. No chance of another trial? None. Then I might as well tell you that I'm guilty as sin.
Yeah, I think we caught on to that by now. Hogman places a wad of cash in Matt's jacket, and Billy runs crying from the courtroom. Later, Daredevil pounces on a strolling Hogman, threatening to beat him over his actions. Hogman, however, isn't intimidated.
You'll do nothing to me, Hornhead. I've been reading about you. You're a nice guy, a regular bleeding heart. You wouldn't punch out a guy just 'cause you feel like, especially a guy with such a delicate heart condition that he needs a pacemaker.
Okay, that's a bit more of a twist. But it again shows us how stupid Matt's judgment was in trusting this guy solely on his heartbeat. He didn't ask any questions, he didn't look for any other signs, he didn't investigate the obviously evil guy's actions. Nope, regular heartbeat and bam, he's innocent. And at no point did he ever stop to think about why his heartbeat was regular, nor did he bother to look into anything that might help him understand more about the case or Hogman's whereabouts at the time of the shooting. I'm sorry, dude, but this is just as much on you as it is him.
The only way you could be less productive is if you were, in fact, the wall in which you're leaning against. Of course, then you'd be providing some jackass with a wall in which to lean against and reflect on what a jackass he truly is.
Later, Daredevil's kicking himself over not considering the pacemaker scenario, while rushing to Billy's house to prevent him from doing anything stupid. And according to this artwork, Daredevil has gained the ability to turn himself into a green super ball. Boingy, 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 boingy. Meanwhile, Billy calls up Hogman and tells him that he saw him kill Marky, demanding money to stay silent. Hogman, however, isn't going to take that, and goes to the school to kill him. At the same time, Daredevil reaches Billy's house to find that Billy stole his father's gun again to kill Hogman with. Wasn't Billy in foster care earlier? Oh, whatever. We cut to Billy and Hogman at the school, where Billy is pointing his gun at him. Hogman's about to order his henchmen to kill him, and then the Punisher shows up and just kills the goon.
Wow, they held the tension for a full second.
Hogman manages to grab Billy's gun, threatening to shoot the kid, but the Punisher, being the Punisher, easily shoots through Hogman's hand and leg. Frank gets ready to finish him off, but Daredevil arrives just in time to intervene. Punisher then turns the gun on him before switching to his own gun. Daredevil calls the Punisher's bluff, telling him that he knows Frank is intentionally missing and he won't kill an innocent person. Punisher says he'll call a truce and deal with Hogman later, turning to leave, but Daredevil tells him he's going to jail as well, shooting him when he turns around with his firearm.
That's for the tranquilizer dart earlier. I wanted to see The Walking Dead too, you know.
Billy grabs the Punisher's gun and points it at Hogman, ready to fire. Daredevil urges Billy not to throw his life away, and that they have enough to put Hogman away. Billy gets ready to defy him, and then we cut to days later, where Billy's testimony and evidence supplied by Daredevil have led to Hogman being indicted for drug dealing and murder. Billy asks Matt if he can promise that Hogman will stay in jail, Matt responding that all they can do is count on the laws put forth to protect the world from evil. And so our comic ends with Billy telling Matt goodbye, and sadly walking away into the distance. In the Child's Play trade, anyway, the actual comic features one final page where Heather sneaks into her company and inquires her computer about a certain business she signed a check for, finding that they're responsible for manufacturing explosives. Next issue, Guts. As in what you have if you've made it this far into the review. These comics are okay, but they're also unbelievably goofy. I think the main problem with these comics, and the trade in particular, is false advertising. 182 and the beginning and title of 183 suggested that the story was mainly going to focus on children being roped into the shady business of drug dealing, both as users and distributors. However, besides the kid at the end of 182 and Mary Liz and the gang of kids in 183, drugs and children being caught in the crossfire is pretty much dropped, with the story instead becoming two very forced and mediocre pseudo-mysteries and court dramas. It really is stupidity that drives these cases along, with Billy being accused of a crime that could easily be proven otherwise, and Matt putting all his faith solely in Hogman's heart not skipping a beat during his trial. Also, Billy's plot doesn't seem that integral to the overall story, and only seems to be there to justify the title. Maybe him bursting into the hospital at the beginning, then threatening Hogman at the end would fit, but his other appearances just seem like unnecessary filler. And despite a large chunk of issue 182 being dedicated to the Punisher breaking out of prison and wanting to wage war on drug dealers, he doesn't have that much involvement in subsequent issues. He pops up in the middle and end of issue 183, then at the beginning and end of issue 184, most of his appearances only lasting a few panels. It all just feels like a large amount of build-up to a story that never happens, and makes me question why these issues in particular were published in their own trade, especially since they had to cut out several scenes to keep the story somewhat related to the title. However, the pacing is pretty solid, and we do get to see the steps taken to get Matt's clients out, or back in, to trouble, despite how silly the reasoning behind them is. The artwork, while goofy in some parts, is really good for the early 80s. I can't think of any panels where the proportions look out of whack or a facial expression seems silly and out of place, so huge kudos to Klaus Janson. And while there's not as much action in these issues as you'd expect, when we get a fight scene, it's actually pretty exciting. The artwork showing each step of Daredevil's acrobatics like it was a dance, and the Punisher just looking buff and intimidating in each panel he appears in. Plus, I kinda like how Daredevil and the Punisher don't actually team up, and despite Daredevil's more anti-hero portrayal during this period, his and the Punisher's ethics don't quite match, resulting in a clash where they're both working towards the same goal, but they have to fight each other off at the same time. It's actually an interesting comparison and contrast. Or the start of one, anyway. I feel like if they trimmed Billy's scenes and the stupid court cases and had a longer period of discussion and comparison between the two heroes, this might have been one of Miller's more interesting works. As is, it just feels like filler between two final events in Miller's run. You'll read it, you might enjoy reading it, but then you'll forget about it afterwards. Still, I'll take Miller's mediocre work from the 80s over most of his more recent work any day. Next time, we'll be taking a look at something Frank Miller may not have written, but he did indeed inspire, with the possible future story, Spider-Man Reign. Till then, I'll see you! Oh geez, not again.
Baby, 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 baby.
Dee ba ba da ba dee ba 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 ya da da ba ba hoo ba da ba dee ba 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 boo ba ba da ba dee ba 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 da boo ba doo ba 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 doo. What is even up with this trade cover? So you have Daredevil and Punisher, who never worked together during the comic, saving these kids who were never in the comic, and Punisher is shooting something with this haze of bullets coming out of two massive guns that I don't think we see in the comic either. And they're apparently crashing through a glass pane with such force that it's splintered into thousands of tiny fragments. So if your goal was trying to save these kids from whatever you're trying to get them away from, well, I'm sorry to say, but you failed spectacularly.